My wife died almost 10 years ago, and I haven't been in contact with my estranged son for almost as long. I've never been regarded as the most affectionate nor easy to be around person. In fact, some would say that I'm a crotchety old bastard that doesn't know how to express emotion. Well, that's just not true. I can promise you that. In fact, I'm very capable of expressing emotion. Just so happens that those emotions wind up taking the form of anger or short temperament. I drove my son away after my wife died because I wasn't there for him the way a father should have been. He needed a shoulder to cry on, but I was too wrapped up in my own distress from losing her that I took all my anger and frustration out on him. I said some things that I wish I could take back, and I regret all of it to this day. Now, every night I sit in my home, retired, alone, and missing every important person that is no longer a part of my life. Last night, I was sitting in my favorite chair, drinking a nice cold glass of scotch, reminiscing through old photo albums. Eventually, I found a particularly old one with many photos of myself as a child with my parents and my childhood dog Otis. I really missed Otis. He was the best friend a boy like me could have asked for. Even way back then, I was just as aggressive and hard to get along with, so I didn't have many friends. Otis, however, was the only friend that I needed. My parents got him for me on my 10th birthday. He was the most adorable German Shepard puppy in the world. Over the following years, I took great care of him, taught him as many tricks as I could, played together with him constantly. On Christmas morning, when I was 15 years old, I lost him. Not necessarily that he died, at least to my definitive knowledge, but he was dog-napped. We had woken up to discover that our home had been burglarized, stealing not only a piggy bank full of money and all of the Christmas gifts, but my beloved dog Otis as well. And he was never found. My heart was broken, and I cried for weeks. Already with a sour attitude towards people, I became angry and aggressive. I was a pretty nasty bully and picked on one kid in particular. Jeffrey Combs was a scrawny kid with big Coke bottle glasses, while I was 5'9" and around 200 pounds. Looking back, there was no excusing how I treated him. I picked on him, pushed him around, even beat him up on the few occasions he tried to stand up to me. While I may still be a foul-mouthed bastard in a constant bad mood these days, I do wish I could apologize to him. Unfortunately, he took his own life about a week before high school graduation. I felt horrible, and even wondered if I had been kinder to him, if it couldn't have been avoided. I was never held accountable for it, as back then bullying wasn't considered nearly as big of a problem as it is today. That same year, however, I met my soon-to-be wife. She was the first person to actually manage to get a positive first impression out of me. We dated for about a month before I popped the question, and to my delight, she accepted. We had a pretty happy life together, and we had our only son, Dominic, the following year. I was a hard ass to him, what we'd call tough love. Don't get me wrong, I love my son very much, always have and always will. He probably never picked up on that though, as my parental techniques involved more lectures and discipline than praises and affection. When my wife died, all of my old anger and aggression came spilling out. I haven't seen nor heard from him ever since. I see him on social media, but he won't accept any of my friend requests or messages. At least I know that he is alive and living a good life, even if I am not part of it. As I looked through the old photos of me and Otis, I began tearing up. I never did get closure for his disappearance. Did he have a good life with whoever took him? Was he killed? As tears dripped on old photos, I suddenly heard knocking at my front door. I found it odd, as it was raining pretty heavily outside at this point in time. Soon, the knocking turned to what sounded like scratching. "Who is it?" I announced, struggling to stand to my feet. There was no answer, however, just more knocking and more scratching. Faster and faster, the scratching became more aggressive, knocking louder and louder. Hesitantly, I peeked out of the peephole to see no one standing outside the door. I then realized that the sounds of knocking and scratching were coming from down low, as if it were a very small child. That was crazy, though. What would a child be doing beating and scratching at my door, with no parents, this late at night, in the middle of a rainstorm? Slowly, I turned the knob and opened the door. All I could see was the dark night city streets, the heavy rain pouring down, and a German Shepard that looked all too familiar. What? I asked myself out loud. A dog? What's a dog doing here? The dog just stood there, on all fours, staring at me, as if waiting for me to invite him inside. Well, come on in, boy, I said to him, motioning for him to come inside. I don't know why I let some random stray into my home, but there was something familiar and safe about him. And then it occurred to me why, when I closed the door and turned to him, getting my first real good look. He was wearing a purple collar, the same purple collar that I had given to Otis all those years ago. I thought my eyes must have been playing tricks on me, so I wiped my glasses off on my shirt and looked again. I stood there in shock and confusion, as well as a deep emotional punch to the gut. It was Otis. This dog was my Otis. The same Otis that was taken from me so many years ago. This couldn't be real, though. Even if he had somehow found me at a completely new house, in a completely new state, it had been 50 years. There was absolutely no way that this could be the same dog. He wouldn't have lived past my 23rd birthday, but there he sat in my living room. Otis? I said quietly. Is that really you, boy? He stared intently at me, still looking exactly the same as I had remembered him. We both stood there, dead silent. Finally, he spoke. Yes, he said in a low, raspy voice that sounded like it had struggled to get out that one word. I backed away in shock and dropped my glass, splashing the whiskey onto my slippers. I wasn't concerned about that, however, so much as I was about a dog that should have died 47 years ago, just spoken to me. As I looked closer at what was claiming to be Otis, I could see that he, or it, was quivering the corners of his mouth, trying its best to present some pitiful excuse for a smile. This was pretty unnerving to me, as it reminded me of an old creepy image I had found on the internet a couple of years ago. There was something about him, though, as I looked even closer at him. For the most part, this was definitely how I remembered Otis looking, down to the same spot on his chest that made him distinguishable. There was one major difference that I noticed while shuddering at his unnerving smile. His eyes were completely blank and lifeless. Even with that smile, there was no emotion or soul. I wondered if this was what people saw in me. Is this how I presented myself to all those people that said I was incapable of emotion? If so, I'm sorry to every person I've ever made feel this way. It was so horrible and uncomfortable. I knew something about him was wrong, but I couldn't help but feel a tiny sense of happiness to see him. I needed this feeling, and he showed up. So I did what I will probably end up regretting. I kept him. Even now, as I write this, he's still staring, with that empty smile and those blank, emotionless eyes. I'm not sure if he slept or even blinked since he arrived. He just stares, never taking his eyes off of